Okay, today we're going to talk about another tool that's actually in some ways very similar to the clone stamp tool, but it has some very specific uses, I guess. I mean, you can use it for just about anything, but it's more for smaller areas. The clone stamp tool would be something that could be really useful if I were to say, you know, want to get rid of something in the background. So here I've got this photograph, and you know, I've got these bright highlights back here in the background. The clone stamp tool might be good for that. But if I wanted to, you know, if I take a look at this image, if I wanted to do some just real basic editing on things like, you know, blemishes on the skin, you know, I love this portrait. This was actually taken last year. The shadows are a little heavy underneath the eyes, just with the lighting the way they are and the way her, you know, just her expression kind of caused these heavy shadows. So we're going to take care of some of that stuff. But this tool that I would use wouldn't necessarily be my first choice for getting rid of something in the background. Maybe taking care of a flyaway, you know, on the back of her head, the hairs that are sticking out there. I might probably try the clone stamp tool with that. But the tool that I'm going to show you today is called the healing brush. Now, when you open it up, I just want to kind of review this. Once you open up a Camera Raw, make sure that you make all the adjustments you can in Camera Raw first. Okay, and that's very important. All the adjustments that you can in Camera Raw first. Because, as I've said before, once you get out of Camera Raw and you hit the Open Image button, you can't get back in. So all these adjustments need to happen first before you start editing anything else. We'll just assume everything's okay, and we're going to open them. Now, I already have another example opened up here, and I just want to show you what I've done already. So if we just take a look at, you know, her face, nice and big, the first thing I did was I just took care of blemishes, moles, that kind of stuff, so you can kind of see those go away. And some of them aren't exactly perfect, but we'll talk about that. And then look at the shadows underneath the eyes. Okay, you can also just take care of stuff like that. Okay, the trick to this tool is just like a lot of the others in Photoshop. Layers are your life. You have got to create new layers in order to do this. However, with the healing brush, which is right over here. So your clone stamp tool is here, your brush tool is here, here's your healing brush tool, okay? And you've got two, the spot healing brush and the healing brush. And you can see the spot healing brush has a little like dotted circle around it, and then the regular healing brush has nothing. And we're going to go over the differences between the two tools and when you might use one or another in a minute. We'll just stick on the spot healing brush for now. These things, if you notice up here, there is a sample all layers checkbox here, which can be very helpful. You also see content aware, proximity match, create texture. These two you don't need to worry about too much. But the content aware, you almost always want to have that on. Because what it's going to do, and this is one of the things that was new in Photoshop in the last couple of years, is it analyzes your image and it looks at the pixels around it and it looks for massive changes in color, changes in texture, changes in a lot of things, and it tries to be smart and fill in things automatically for you. It's really cool. So you're probably sitting there going, what is he talking about? Well, let me show you. So one of the things that I always like to do is we can create a new layer, or you can duplicate the layer that you're already on, but let's just create a new layer. And if I do that, then the thing that I have to be really careful about is I need to make sure that sample all layers is checked, okay? Notice content aware all of a sudden is in there, okay? And now we're going to go in and we can just start to try and take care of some blemishes, okay, that are up here. The size of the brush and the edges of the brush here are really, 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 really important, okay? So I always put the hardness somewhere around 60–50% to start off, see how I like it, and then go from there. So now what I'll do is If I just go here and I just paint a little circle, you'll notice it goes black for a second. But then when I let go, it thinks, and then you can see how it kind of filled in. And it tried to approximate basically the tones that were already there. Sometimes it works better than others. It's not always perfect. And again, the size of the brush, the edge of the brush, that sort of thing, those are very important, and you're going to have to experiment with those a little bit more. Okay? Also, the direction that you drag can be very important. Okay? Now notice you can start to see these edges around here. You can see them, very subtly. I think my brush has too hard of an edge number, which is, going to be part of the problem. So I'm going to step backwards here, which is Command, Option, and Z. And let's just try getting a brush with a little bit less of an edge and see how that works. That's a lot better. And also, if I just do a click like that, it works a little differently than if I do, a swipe. And it still is making some more, blemishes or the circles around the areas that I'm doing. So let's try slightly different settings. So we're going to check on. Oh no, I don't want. Yeah, we want content aware. Proximity, create texture will actually try and put texture in there with you, but it looks. It does an okay job, but it kind of gets grainy. It does like the noise filter like I showed you the other day. And proximity match tries to use the pixels next to it, and it makes a copy. So it becomes more like the clone stamp tool. So again, as I said before, your best bet is oftentimes content aware, and then just being really smart. If you're getting something that's not working very well or has too much of an edge to it, maybe it's time to go and try the healing brush tool. Now, the healing brush tool is also smart tool, but here it's like the clone stamp tool. So what it does, it allows us to use the Option key to define an area that you want it to click or to sample from, and then copies it over. So I'm going to go up here and select Sample, Current and Below, or All Layers, but I like Current and Below most of the time. And I'm not going to worry about aligned right now. Aligned means that as I move the brush, the sample area will go with it. Sometimes you might want that, sometimes you don't. In this case, I probably don't. Let's get a bigger brush here. And so I'm just going to go bloop. And you can see how now that seemed to work a lot better for me. If it's a little bright in certain areas, I can go down here and it will again try and create the tones in a way that based on where I clicked from. Now you'll notice if it's not aligned, if I'm clicking from this tone here and I go down here and I click, see where you can see the target is off to the right there? If I go over here and click, notice the target's in the same place. If I click the aligned button that's way up here, now the target's going to move with the cursor when I start to do my thing. So here I have the target over here, I set it, I go there, and then if I go up here, you'll notice the target moved up. I might not want that because as I moved up, it goes to a darker tone up here, and I probably want it lighter. So we'll uncheck aligned for this one. With the clone stamp tool, I always have aligned on because you almost always want the clone stamp tool to be working with the cursor. But this is a really great tool because it's smart. It really looks at what you're doing and it tries to fill in. So you see it did a nice job of filling in that wrinkle. You know, and it takes care of a lot of these little textures and stuff like that. And we don't want to take away, again, we're not trying to change and alter the person's face to the point where they look like somebody different. We're not doing that. Again, I kind of said in my last lesson, that's unethical. But what we're doing is we're getting rid of things things that may or may not be there on any given day, like blemishes, pimples, that sort of stuff. So I can, go in here and because it's a smart tool, because it really looks at what's around it and tries to match the tones for you and stuff, it really makes taking care of certain things, it really makes it very easy. Whereas with the clone stamp tool, I used to have to spend hours and hours and hours matching tones, getting things done. Now I can just sit here and click, 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 and I have taken somebody's face, and I've cleaned it up. Whoops, see, now I copied it. I cleaned it up without, doing too much work. It has saved me so much time as a photographer to be able to do stuff like this. So see here, she's got a little mole on her face. I'm not going to get rid of that because that's who she is, right? I mean, so there's a line that you want to, whenever you're doing any kind of editing, and I don't want to preach, but there's a line that you always want to be mindful of how much editing is good and where you cross that line to something that's honestly maybe a little bit unethical. She's got these nice dimples here. I'm not going to get rid of those dimples because that's just kind of silly. That's part of the appeal of her. I mean, it's a rather little mischievous smile, right? And those dimples are part of that. And if you get rid of those dimples, all of a sudden I think would have a slightly different character to it. So you want to be very careful about what you do when you're editing. Now, the last thing I wanted to do is I want to take care of these shadows underneath the eyes. When I'm working with the healing brush or the spot healing brush, one of the things that I always find is very important is I always try to group my corrections by layers. So I'm going to go over here to my layers. I'm not going to try and correct the shadows on the same layer as the skin corrections. So I'm going to go over here to my layer, and I'm going to double click on the text, and I'm just going to call this healing, and I'm just going to call this, blemishes or skin. Yeah, that's probably better. Skin, whatever. Okay? And now I'm going to lock that layer so I can't accidentally mess it up. And then now I'm going to go back down here to the bottom of the layers palette, and I'm going to make another layer. See that? And we're going to call this one Healing Shadows. Now, it's really important to name it, and I also think it's really important to name it Healing, because this tells you what tool you were using and what your intent was with this layer. So now what we're going to do is we're going to try and get rid of these shadows, and it's a process that actually takes a little longer than the blemishes, and we're going to have to work with the layer a little bit. You're going to see why I really wanted to make these things two separate layers in just a second. So first thing first, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to need a much bigger brush, and I'm going to work not with the spot healing tool, but the regular healing brush tool. And what I want to do is I want to sample from this lightened area of skin right here, and I want to bring that over top of these heavier shadows underneath her eyes. Now, I don't mind the shadows that are underneath the eyebrows here because that's kind of natural. But it's really the wrinkles that cause the shadows underneath here. We want to soften those. I'm not going to get rid of them. It's just the lighting was a little bit harsher, and it shows up in those wrinkles underneath the eyes. So I'm going to sample from here, so Option and click, and I'm going to take this nice big brush, and I'm just going to go whoosh. Okay. Now notice it got rid of them completely. And that looks a little weird, doesn't it? Okay? So I'm going to back up a little bit, maybe go with a slightly smaller brush, and take my hardness down a touch. Okay? And then I have a plan. Always. So now that's probably not, I want a little harder of a brush. And I like to use the preview here, and I can really see kind of how the edge is going to look. So now I'm going to take my sample again. It's not aligned, so it's always going to be sampling from this section. And I'm just going to go there. Thinks about it for a second, goes okay. Do it again. Okay. Now, it looks a little weird. Yes, I know. We're going to go over to the other side, and then I'll show you what we do. So then I'm going to take this, and I'm again going to take that and just do that, and it kind of does its thing. Now I'm going to take my opacity for this layer, and I'm going to drag it down until it starts to look a little bit more natural. So I'm at 50%. There, I like that, about 45%. So before, after, before, after. You can kind of see it's just lightening those shadows a little bit. And this opacity thing, that was in my plan all along, because I've done this before, so I know this. This is why it's important to have the shadows thing on a separate layer than the skin stuff, because if I have to adjust the layer, when I lighten, if I lighten the other corrections, then all of a sudden you're going to start seeing those blemishes come through. Well, that we don't want, obviously, right? So we want to keep the correction layer that we do for the blemishes. We want to make sure that that stays at full opacity, and then the shadows layer we can adjust individually. So it's really good idea to create a new layer when you're doing a new set of corrections or a new thing. So if you're just adjusting shadows, then make sure that's on one layer. If you're adjusting blemishes or something like that, make sure that's on another layer. And then let me also say, don't, you might even want, by the way, if I take a look at this shadow over here underneath her right eye, which is on our left side, is a little bit harsher than the one on the right. It might even be prudent to do each one on a separate layer so that I could change the opacity of the healing brush layer individually for each eye to make sure that each one is better. Does that make sense to everybody too? So that I could even them out a little bit. And there was something else I was going to say, but now I've forgotten what it is. Oh, notice that she's, this is a nice image, but she's also got like pores and stuff in her skin that are showing up. Don't smooth out everything either. It's so easy to go totally overboard on this and just try to get rid of every little imperfection. Don't do that, because then she'll look like a plastic toy. She'll look like a Barbie doll. We don't want that. We don't want to make things not look like reality. We're just trying to lighten things up, or lighten some shadows, get rid of blemishes. I mean, I can't say that enough. Don't go absolutely nuts with this tool. It's only to correct things that, let's say if it's not there every day, then you can get rid of it. But if it's an actual feature that's part of who that person is, then leave it. Don't try and alter reality here. Just clean things up a little bit. Does that make sense? I mean, there's a line there, and sometimes it's a gray line, sometimes a little fuzzy line, but there's a line there that is important to think about. But if you're getting rid of every single pore of the skin, I think something's wrong. And you guys will notice there are in a lot of programs like Aperture, which is a Mac program for photographs, which has some of these editing tools. Adobe Lightroom has it too. There's a skin smoothing tool where you can wipe it a lot like this healing brush, and you can wipe it on the cheek and it will get rid of all these little pores. I don't like using it. I think, I don't know, I have problems with that, because now you're taking what's reality and you're altering it. And good makeup can do the same thing, and yet now, I don't know. There's a line there. It's gray, and when you've crossed it, you usually know. Okay, this is a really great tool, and if you just take a look at the difference in the image before, right? Okay, and after. There's just some nice, subtle changes. Especially, my favorite is the change under the eyes. Just that little lightening of that shadow just really changes things. It lightens things up a little bit. It makes things a lot nicer. And I think that there's a lot of things that you could do here. This might even be where I would do a correction layer, like a curves or a levels correction layer, and just lighten up the eyes just a touch. Not change their color, but just lighten them a little bit, and then mask them out so that the face and everything has the regular darkness and contrast, but I just lighten up. She's got these brown eyes, they're very dark. It would be nice to lighten them maybe just a little bit to create some contrast in there. Not too much, because then they'll look like they're glowing. But again, a lot of these things are just very little subtle changes that you can make in the computer to take what is just a normal photograph and bring out its strengths. And as I said in the last demo too, if you've got a photograph that's really bad, don't spend hours trying to make it good. This is where you take a good photograph and you bring out its strengths and you make it a little stronger. You're not making a bad photograph better, because it doesn't usually work. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, cool tool. That's all.